Chapter 69. It had been going so well. The bands were selling and the company was making money. He'd relocated back home to Southsea and had a penthouse flat overlooking both the Common and Spitbank Fort, one of Palmerston's follies which had sat in the Solent since 1878. Steve was in a place where the 100-hour weeks that he'd endured for a quarter of a century had paid off. At long last he had a manageable schedule. At 48 years old, Steve could see the future. The business could sustain itself under his leadership team, allowing him to drift into semi-retirement. He planned to live part-time in the Caribbean, where the vibe flowing through the islands invigorated him on each of his trips out there. Amy was with him. She'd grown into a fine woman and was working for his company. She had the inevitable flair that had come from a lifetime of watching her father creating music royalty. At 21, she now managed the London office. However, as the nation watched the government press conference, it was clear that London was about to close. So, with just a few hours' notice before the city shut its doors, Amy raced to Waterloo, taking the train down to Portsmouth to stay at her dad's seafront apartment. The government-mandated controls gave her a quick choice: an abandoned city or the seaside. All bookings, recordings, press conferences and summer festivals were cancelled, and their world was to shut down for an indefinite period. Amy had closed the office, grateful that as panic set in across the city, at least she had somewhere else to go. Amy had lived with her mum all her life, but after her dad moved out, she would spend most weekends with him. It was so different being in the middle of the world her dad was at the centre of, compared to the dark, bitter place that her mum plodded through. Since he had come back from the catastrophe of 9/11, Steve had done his best to be a good father. And all these years on, Amy saw her parents split as a blessing for them both. Her dad had flourished and was happier with his life. Despite being better off alone, her mum failed to develop a positive outlook and left her confined within the parameters she set herself. It created a long-term resentment, Greta becoming increasingly convinced that her best days had passed her by and she'd given it all up for the loveless life which she trudged. While she never used the exact words, Amy knew she resented what she'd given up for her. Greta fell in and out of destructive relationships with narcissistic men and gradually became impossible to live with. Amy moved between their houses as she wished. Taking up the offer of a job with her dad was a no-brainer. She loved his business and loved the idea of being close to him as they worked. Although she enjoyed the energy that London generated, she was equally drawn to the comfort of family time on the coast, where she could spend hours walking along Southsea front with the men in her life, her granddad and father taking great pleasure in regaling her with stories about their lives. Her dad's stories were ridiculous, funny and intoxicating, and as she got older, he drifted into revealing more of the darkness in his soul, using Amy as a therapeutic release in revisiting the tragedy of 2001. He didn't go into great detail, but had started to explain the images that still shocked him from sleep. And sometimes he mentioned a girl called Isla as his great regret, but he never said much more. Walking past the old castle where Henry VIII watched the Mary Rose sink, she was glad that her dad was finally unburdening himself. Amy was tapping into the sealed emotions that Steve had never confided in anybody. She probably got further than the professional therapist who had supported her dad almost 20 years before. Despite COVID-19, their business was going to be fine. The government furlough scheme had helped with the costs of mothballing. The physical business had been put to sleep on that grim March day when the venues were all forced to close their doors, but everything would surely reopen sometime down the road, at the point when the restrictions were lifted. In the meantime, new opportunities emerged during lockdown. Live streaming presented the opportunities which Steve loved so much. All good leaders embraced change with typical quick thinking, and Steve spotted the opportunities while much of the business still floundered. This was what continued to give him the edge. It was a new age and Steve was helping to shape it. He was promoting the next biggest thing ever, and Maverick Road would have their day. When the madness ended and it was safe, they would have their world tour. The 2020 tour was going to take in every major city between Dublin and Moscow. It would just have shifted 12 months forward. At least that was the hope. Surely there's no way this chaos will last longer than a few months. They'd have to redesign the t-shirts, but maybe the 2020 ones would be collector's items as the tour that never happened. Steve had never been content to rest on his laurels. The nation was a captive audience, and his aim was to live stream the band into every home in the country before lockdown was lifted. The kids streamed and did their daily workout with Maverick Road. They streamed their own live lounge channel and even did a Cook with Maverick Road slot. Facebook, Twitter and other social media with photos, news pods, blogs and interactive FaceTime were drenched with the sounds of Maverick Road. They were everywhere. He'd first found the band playing at the Wedgwood Rooms just around the corner from his home. He wandered into a Square Roots promotions night after the promoter, an old mate from the school band, had asked him out for a beer. It was still incredible that in this high-tech age, where image and online is everything, a 5-minute walk to meet an old friend for a drink could still lead to a chance opportunity. While the internet age made everything less personal, the intimacy of gigging was yet to be replaced. The old ways were still current, with the added bonus of musicians being more accessible than ever. Amy was Steve's world. She was an acolyte at work, but by no means a deferential employee, and never shy in presenting her ideas or persuading her dad that he did not know the youthful audience he targeted as well as he thought. She knew that once upon a time, if you did this, the consequences was that. If you created a buzz in NME or did an interview with the Evening Standard, you could guarantee it would add 200 tickets to an audience at the Roundhouse. But if you were trying to get university students out on a Tuesday night in Huddersfield, the chances of the old ways working with a few posters around the union was not enough. Viral didn't just mean a global pandemic. He had a media team in place, but he knew it took a certain type of management to really get behind things that he didn't always understand. As such, she was a terrific addition to his media team when she joined the company. Steve knew her value and was unapologetic in helping her career advance quickly. She delivered, and that was what mattered. But his runny nose was not hay fever, and the cough was not because of the many spliffs he continued to enjoy after dark. The instruction was clear. He had to self-isolate and just hope that Amy hadn't picked up anything. God knows where he got this wretched virus from. He'd been careful. He'd shopped online and washed it when it was delivered. They hadn't left the house other than for the government-sanctioned daily walk. For the first time in his adult life, he'd not been to a gig for a whole calendar month. Not that there were any to go to. Even when Amy was a baby, he still did 3 or 4 gigs a week. No wonder he and Greta had struggled. There were still no tests available for Steve to confirm if he had the virus or not, but he wasn't getting any better, so after a few days he turned on the out-of-office on his email and hunkered down. He was far weaker than he could remember and was struggling with everything. While Amy did her best caring for him in a mask and rubber gloves, cleaning obsessively and cooking the food that he couldn't face for your own good, she finally phoned the hospital and arranged for her dad to be admitted to QA. Looking down on a city that her dad grew up in, the hospital complex was in a state of ordered panic as she drove through the main entrance. Steve was in the back of her car, trying to hold it together. He was scared. He was not ready to die, not even close. The hospital staff were kind to Steve as he was admitted through the doors into the COVID section, and to Amy, who was required to leave after the formalities were complete. The hospital staff, who hadn't been home in days, were all heroes. It didn't take long for things to change, for the better. Within a few days, Steve was calling over FaceTime and in constant contact through WhatsApp. She thought he was secretly enjoying his time off, watching endless crime dramas and ridiculous chick flicks on Netflix without anyone to take the piss out of his TV choices. By the end of the week, she was told she could pick her dad up in the morning. Amy cooked, cleaned, and enforced a strict no-work policy. Steve had to rest and build up gradually, and Amy was not letting her dad's inability to take direction get in the way of her enforcement of the hospital's rules. The laptop would not be switched on again until she said so. She could manage the business until he was ready to take over.